BlogTalk Radio.
Welcome to Hell is for Children, a blog talk radio program for and by protective mothers with your host, Geerte Franken. So what's a protective mother? A protective mother tries to protect her child or children from their abusive father by many means necessary. Yes, you can call in. Are you ready? Operation Expose continues.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Hell is for Children. This show is on every Saturday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, which in Europe is 6 p.m. The call-in number is 347-850-8617. And I would like to start thanking Bobby Biesinger from World Integrity News Network for providing us with this platform that allows anyone who has input on the topic of protective mothers and can think along with us towards solutions to be present on that show. So thank you for tuning in, and it's my honor to have a male guest on today on the topic of protective mothers. And before I introduce my guest, I would like to say that I have the utmost respect for any man who stands up for the rights of women, and in particular mothers and children. Like the Native Americans' motto is that it is a man's highest calling to protect woman and child so they are free to walk the earth unharmed. So without further ado, I would like to introduce investigative journalist Michael Volpe, who has been reporting on the plight of protective mothers for many years. And he's also the author of Bullied to Death, Chris Magny's Kafkaesque Divorce, which is available on Amazon. And Michael is an expert on the topic of judicial bullying. So welcome to Hell is for Children, Michael Volpe.
Thanks for having me. You hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Hey, Michael, I'd like to start sharing with the audience how we met. About a year ago, you showed interest in writing a story for comdiginews.com, and it was about the case of my daughter Jasmijn, in which you used the pseudonym Ruby for her. And in order to report on that story, you actually took the time to really delve into all the records pertaining to her case with extreme thoroughness. And you also followed up with the people involved in the case to double-check all the facts. And that included also Jasmine's father, with whom you ended up having dozens of email conversations. And when you confronted him with the fact that his stories didn't match up with the facts in front of you, and that he had offered you several different versions of his side of the story, he started threatening you in what you described as immediate and intense bullying. But you didn't let that intimidate you, which was awesome. So first of all, I want to thank you for your thoroughness. You are the first person in the United States since the court abduction of my daughter to actually take the time and effort to really look into all the facts of the case, which means a lot to me. It was really important to me because not even judges have taken that time and effort, for crying out loud. And we're talking about vulnerable children here whose lives depend on thorough investigations. And when you saw the facts I presented to you, that they were accurate in relation to what I had shared with you about the case, it felt really validating to me, and that was a really important part of my healing process. So thank you for that. And second of all, I want to thank you for standing up to bullies, because you don't seem to be a man who allows anyone to intimidate you, right?
That's correct. It's been almost a year, so a lot of the details of your case, I'm not going to remember all of them. One thing I remember, first of all, I contacted your ex had a previous attorney, and then he had a current attorney, because at one point I think the case was in Nevada, and then it moved to California. So I contacted his Nevada attorney, and then I contacted his California attorney, and he actually contacted me. And I feel if you talk to the attorney, that's more than good enough, especially since both of them gave me several statements and conducted the interviews. But if he was willing to speak to me, the more quotes you get for an article, in my opinion, the better from multiple sources. So that was no problem. But you're right. The one thing that sticks out in my mind as far as like the duplicity that he had was you took your daughter, I think it's called GGNet, which is like a social services investigative unit in Netherlands when she suggested he had been molesting her. And then they produced the report was sent to The Hague, and I think they originally wrote the report in Dutch, and it was translated for me in English, or at least what you gave me was an English translation. And so
these were reports from the Child State Mental Health Institute of the Netherlands, and they were actually, these 6 reports by these 5 experts were actually translated by a court-licensed translator. So these were official translations that you received from me.
Right. So he at one point claimed or somebody doctored the translation, and then at another point he claimed that you manipulated the folks at GGNet or whatever they're called. And I said, well, you can't really say both those things happened. And he goes, well, either of them could have happened. I said, well, either could have happened, but you're saying both of them happened. And so that that's a red flag. However, it's very hard for me to tell who's lying. So I always look at the documents. He said I was thorough, and I appreciate it, and I think I was thorough. But these stories are complicated, so you can't delve into them skin deep. You have to be thorough. These are complicated issues. You're going to either accuse someone of being a child molester or accuse someone of making that up, and that's a serious charge either way. The compelling thing for me was, besides this social services place, there was a psychologist, I think in Texas, who she didn't quite get to the point where it was child molestation, but she described behavior which is very disturbing. And the third psychologist at The Hague said something similar, and then on top of that, your daughter. And so what was compelling to me was, number one, 3 different professionals who don't know each other. That's very important. In family court, often what you have is multiple professionals being brought on the same case, and then they parrot each other. And I don't think that's evidence of anything. But if a psychologist in Texas says something that's consistent with a group of investigators in the Netherlands, unless you can show me that behind the scenes they were actually colluding with each other, which you didn't show me, that's compelling to me. When you combine that with the fact that your daughter said the same thing, and a third psychologist out in The Hague said something very similar, that's what was really compelling to me. But yeah, no, he was very bullying. He threatened to sue me. He said this, that, and the emails went back and forth for a very long time. And actually, I thought that was great because it covers me. He can't say that he didn't get his side of the story answered. I had his current attorney, I think it's still his current attorney, his attorney in California quoted, his attorney in Nevada quoted, and he was quoted, even his girlfriend was quoted. And the cherry on top was you gave me an email that his girlfriend said, which certainly suggested that his girlfriend believes that he's a child molester, and that even with or without that email, I think I had more than enough, but that was the cherry on top as well. And that's how you got to do these stories. There's multiple layers, and you're going to look through the layers, and you're going to find what's compelling to you. And I felt that multiple different professionals who don't know each other coming to similar or same conclusions, that's very compelling.
Well, it was even more than just 3 psychologists, because there was also there was a child psychiatrist involved, 3 psychologists in the State Mental Health Institute, as well as a neurologist. And Jasmijn actually underwent verbal, nonverbal, and neurological tests, and they all pointed to child abuse, molestation, neglect, and even substance abuse. So there's no way a child can be coached into a neurological test or a nonverbal test.
Right. That's an excellent point. And beyond that, your ex had a history of drug abuse, including several drug tests that he failed within the recent past, I think within a year or two of when I wrote the article. It might have even been sooner than that, which even beyond the child molestation, if you have a heroin addict, I don't think that's a person that's fit to be a parent.
Exactly, and he did. He also skipped
see,
the treatment. You know, he also skipped court-ordered drug treatment. He was supposed to go for 6 months into drug treatment, and he didn't do that. So there was so much evidence there.
Right. I don't remember exactly what he said about that. He tried to claim that the test was bogus, and and again, you're lying. People at GGNet are lying. The psychologist in Texas, I think what she said was she found disturbing, very sexualized behavior. And he said, well, she never said it was child molestation. I was like, maybe, but 11-year-olds aren't supposed to be doing what she was doing. All of
she was
tied
8.
together is
She was 8 at the time, 8 years old.
Right, yeah. The behavior that she was describing. She didn't take it that far, maybe because it didn't cross her mind, or maybe because Jasmine didn't say it to her at the time. But she documented very disturbing sexualized behavior. And again, when you put that together with what other people found, that's what was compelling to me. That's why all of this bullying behavior, it might work on some people. It's useless to me. Either you have the documents or you don't. I'm not going to write a story because I believe you. I'm going to write a story because you can document it. And, when someone is accused of such an act, it is a difficult position because how do you prove it? It's what sort of documentation is someone supposed to provide to prove they didn't molest someone? So I can be sympathetic to that because it's very hard to provide documentation of proving a negative. But be that as it may, when he was presented with all of this documentation, there was a lot of obfuscation and wiggling back and forth. And I certainly didn't find that compelling. And yes, when someone starts to bully me when I'm asking these questions, it's certainly a red flag.
Mm-hmm. Now, it seems like the courts go along with these bullying, abusive fathers, and I know you've been reporting on many protective mothers who deal with bullying, abusive fathers, and bullying courts over the last several years. I've been reading a lot of your articles. What is the pattern that you see with these courts?
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to point out I do report on both sexes, but because of the theme of the show is protective mothers, let's just stick with that. But the main pattern, and your ex did this as well, is and this happens overwhelmingly. And I've reported this repeatedly. And if we have time, we can talk about this 2020 show last night. It's if the protective mother reports abuse, the concept of parental alienation, or there's a very similar concept. There's a very similar term called parental alienation syndrome, which they basically have no difference in meaning. They mean almost the exact same thing. And what that means is the child or children reject one parent over the other in an unnatural way, in a way that they shouldn't reject them. That's what parental alienation is supposed to mean. But basically, the protective mother says, you're hitting the kid, you're mentally, physically, emotionally abusing the kid, or in your case, you're molesting the kid. And the defense is, no, I'm not. You're a parent alienator. And something people need to understand, there is a huge industry behind parental alienation. So there's a lot of money to be made in the successful, I don't know if prosecution is the right term for it, but the successful prosecution of this term throughout a divorce, because as soon as this concept is introduced, so are multiple professionals. And something people need to understand, not in all cases, but in most cases, when a professional is brought into a case where there's parental alienation, they're a parental alienation professional. What that means is that's what they deal with. So they have an inherent financial conflict of interest because they make more money the more the term is proliferated. So the person who's examining you to see if you're a parent alienator, they have a financial incentive to say you are, whether you are or not, because the more parent alienators there are, the more times they're brought into this case. And once you have one professional, you could have two professionals, multiple professionals. I did a story about Sonny Tilley accused. It's very similar to your case in the sense that there was sexual molestation and the charges of parent alienation. She had 12 professionals. 12. Wow. She spent over $1 million. So it's not monolithic. So in each case, there could be a lot of differences. It could be that the person accused has political connections.
Right.
It could just be that kind of corruption, and that's the reason they ignore it. But it's often a financial incentive. It certainly was in Sonny Kelly's case. It's often a financial incentive to bring in a bunch of professionals and to keep the case going. And that's the thing. The protective mother wants to keep fighting for the child. That makes it a perpetual court case. The lawyers get paid, the professionals get paid, and the docket it's full. And that's the main pattern that I've seen. And sometimes it borders on the ridiculous. I did a case out of Connecticut, and Angela Hickman, her ex-husband threw her down the stairs when she was 6 months pregnant. He pled guilty to multiple charges of domestic abuse, and he pled guilty even though she refused to testify because she had PTSD. And a few years later, she's considered a parent alienator. And the court is like, we don't understand why the kids don't love the dad. And I'm thinking, well, maybe they don't love the dad because you threw the mom down the stairs. Is it possible they don't love the dad because he doesn't, because of that? And, it's almost this, it's willful ignorance. It's like, we can't understand why these kids wouldn't love the dad. And, well, maybe because he threw them downstairs. So, and it's willful ignorance too. Like in Angela Hickman's case, I think there was 4 to 7 of these professionals. In another case, Susan Skip, 7 professionals. And again, you have the accusation, and now we need a bunch of professionals to examine the accusation. I can't stress enough, these aren't just psychiatrists or psychologists. These are specialists in parental alienation. If this concept does not proliferate, they have very little business. And then beyond that, you have multiple therapies. There's something called reunification therapy. So now you have all these other therapists who make money. So there's a massive financial incentive to mark these cases parental alienation. Because if your ex is deemed a child molester, he's just out. He should go to jail, but even if he's not going to jail, he's not going to see your daughter. So, it's sort of simple financially in the sense that you have a molester, he can't see the kid, we're done. You have a protective parent, they get sole custody of the kid, we're done. And the court doesn't need to be involved anymore.
In my case, I think Jasmine shouldn't have had any unsupervised visitation with her father when he admitted to the court that he had more than 30-year-long addiction to heroin and cocaine and wasn't able to pass drug tests.
But you're absolutely right. And, I haven't done enough cases in The Hague to say is there a predominant pattern? But,
this is what happened. The Hague court basically said the following. I submitted all this evidence, and they said, the jurisdiction of Jasmine is in the United States, so all of these investigations need to happen in the United States. And so, of course, I said, Article 13 says that that's not the case when there's possible psychological or physical harm upon return of the child. Article 13 should be implemented as well as when the child is very resistant, which Jasmine was. And like you said, she testified twice, so we had all this expert evidence of abuse and molestation. And then when the case appeared in front of Judge Adams in Marin County Superior Court, Judge Adams basically said, the case has been fully investigated in The Hague, and there is no evidence of molestation and abuse, so there's nothing going on. And it's like, no, wait a minute. The Hague court says you have to investigate it, but you're not willing to. Yeah. Right,
and they play those games, especially, and in my book, the last chapter of my book, I give ideas for fixing family court, and broadly, any idea to fix family court needs to, among other things, needs to make it simpler. And anytime these cases become complicated, and yours, it's complicated in the sense that it's been in 3 jurisdictions. Once you get that, there's all sorts of room for abuse. When Nevada can take jurisdiction, California can take jurisdiction, and The Hague can take jurisdiction, there's room for abuse because any one of those courts which is corrupt, they can corrupt the system. And you're right. I mean, that's a great example of how in this case, I guess sort of the natural complication of the case corrupts the case. You have one court telling another court to investigate, and the other court saying, well, they've investigated and there's nothing there. And the first court, which told the second court to investigate, doesn't care anymore. And there you go. And there's where the corruption begins. And, how do you challenge that?
In my case, it was actually it went even further. It was actually not Nevada court, but Nevada County Superior Court, which is also in California. And the father had actually moved the case from Nevada County Superior Court to Marin County Superior Court while I wasn't notified of that. Plus, I was the petitioner in the case. So the entire transfer of the case was already unlawful. And I confronted Judge Adams with that in the first time I was actually in the courtroom with her in November of 2015. And she should have recused herself at that point. If you don't recuse yourself...
She should not have taken the case because she didn't...
Right.
The term for it is jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
So what he was doing, I'm going to give you an example of what I did in New York and Maryland, where it's basically the exact same thing. Basically, what's going on here is and I apologize, I should have said Nevada County, and like I said, it's been a year, so all the details aren't exactly clear. But
that's okay.
Right. So the court in Nevada County was the court that should have heard the case, and this is another great example of how you complicate it. And he moves it out to another county. And that's a form of judge shopping. He didn't like the way things were going in that county, so let's move it to another county and see if I can get a friendlier judge. And by the way, that's why these courts are supposed to continue with jurisdiction, so that someone who doesn't, I don't like the court here, so I'll just move to another court. If you allow that to happen, your ex could have moved it to like 12 different courts before he found one that was friendly to him. That's the reason that's not supposed to happen.
He's not supposed to even move it when he's the respondent, and he's supposed to notify me of the transfer, which he didn't either. So the entire situation is unlawful.
Correct, and there's very, very rarely is it allowed to be moved. In the case that I did, it was Susan Carrington and her ex, John McNeilis. They actually had a divorce which was finalized, which they had joint custody, but she had physical custody. And it was done in, I think, Rockville County, Maryland. And he accused her of being a drug addict, an abuser, this, that, and the other, and the court basically dismissed all of these things. And then he claimed that he was getting a job in Rockland County, New York, which is right next to Manhattan. And he walks into a Rockland County, New York court and gets a restraining order based on the same allegations that he made in Rockville, Maryland, which were dismissed. And the Rockland County court should have said, we don't have jurisdiction, and said they grabbed jurisdiction. And basically, without really changing the custody, they still keeping this woman away from her kids. Now, it's been moved back out of Rockland County, but they've been keeping this woman away from her kids based on this very bogus restraining order without actually changing custody or anything. And that's another great example of complicating the issue by moving it in jurisdictions. And again, that was judge shopping. This guy his family is from Rockland County. His family has a lot of connections in Rockland County. So he goes to a Rockland County court and gets a favorable ruling when he shouldn't have done it. And, I'm not going to bore people with the details, but there's laws on the books which are supposed to stop this. What you're talking about is not legal. It's not supposed to be done, and it was done against all laws.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes against the Constitution, and from what I found out is that because Judge Adams didn't recuse herself in my case, she's actually guilty of treason, which is decided by the Supreme Court of the United States, as well as the attorney of the father, because she should have notified the higher courts of the fact that this judge shouldn't have been in the case anymore.
That's correct. It's called the full faith and credit clause is in the Constitution. What that means is that a ruling in one jurisdiction applies to all jurisdictions. So if you get married in Virginia, that means that marriage is good anywhere you go in the United States and really in the world. But and the reason that they have this, the main reason is to protect people from forum shopping, to protect people from someone like your ex was like, I don't like the way things are going in this county, and John McNeilis. I don't like the way things are going in this county, so let me move it to another county where it's more friendly. And, like, if we didn't have the full faith and credit clause, people like him would just forum shop until they found a forum that they liked. And they just keep going. Oh, I don't like it in this county. Let me move to another county. They just keep going. What's supposed to happen is, hold on, this court has jurisdiction. We don't have a right. It's the same thing in Rockland County. No, you have a assigned custody. That's where it's at. You have to keep it there. That's what they should have done. That's what they didn't do. And for 6 years, they can't. Look, the end effect. What's the end effect? She hasn't seen her daughters in 6 years. That's the end effect. You haven't seen your daughter in about a year. That is the end effect of this kind of forum shopping.
Yeah, and that's what I pointed out to the judge, and she said, well, we're in a custody review hearing, and you can't just bring that up on the fly. This is literally her words. You can't just bring that up on the fly. So, and the fact you don't have an attorney, so there's nothing you can do about it. It's like, excuse me?
Right. That violates your due process. You having an attorney has nothing to do with anything, and and that's an example of a judge where the fix is in. And the fix is it. And the judge wanted this case. And your particular judge, from my understanding, you're not the only victim, I believe. And you get back to the original question. There are just certain judges who don't like women. There are other judges who don't like men. So you ask why do protective mothers get hurt? Well, in front of the wrong judge. There's a judge out of Oakland County, Michigan, who I've been doing a lot of work on, Lisa Gorsica, who I found a pattern. I think she doesn't like women, period. And the reason may be all kinds of things. It could be psychological. And I never did the story, but there was a couple of judges who I believe they were both lesbians near here who just hated men. So it can go both ways. But it could be psychological. If it's a woman hating woman, there's all kinds of psychological issues. But it could be that the father's rights movement is in their ears. It could be that they're getting funding from certain sources, which puts that kind of funding in their ears. There's a lot of different reasons, but on a micro level, it could simply be that this judge favors one sex over the other. And it's a great example with this woman, Lisa Gorsuch. And she became notorious when she sentenced 3 kids to juvenile hall because they refused to have lunch with their dad. I did 3 other stories. She always favors the man. I found 4. It could be anecdotal, but I believe that there are serious gender issues in that case, and I think it's the same thing with your judge.
Yeah, tell us about that case where the children didn't want to see the father, and the judge sent the children to jail as a result. That's such an outrageous story. Tell us about that one.
Right. Now, before I get to that, the reason the children didn't want to see their dad is because there's a history of abuse, documented history of abuse. In one case, the father was running around the park threatening to kill them. In another case, he pinned one of the kids up against the wall. The kid had a contusion on his chest, or her chest. I can't remember if it was a male or a female, but so there's a history of abuse. So the reason these kids didn't want to see their dad, it's like in the Angela Hickman case. The reason they didn't want to see their dad is because their dad is an abuser. Their dad's name is Omer Simone. So basically, what was going on was they refused to see their dad, and it wasn't happening over one day. It was happening over months and years. And the judge just had enough, so she said, either you go have lunch with your dad, or I'm putting you in juvenile hall, and threatened to put them in juvenile hall until they were 18. This is Judge Lisa Gorsica. Sentenced the 3 Simone kids, suggested they were like the Manson cult, and this is again parental alienation. This suggests parental alienation. She sentenced them to juvenile hall. They're hauled off with handcuffs behind their backs. They're put in juvenile hall. It leaks. It's covered locally. It goes international. In 2 weeks, she puts them into this camp. But she's not done. She temporarily switched custody. The mother, until today, is the second day she's able to see her kids over this weekend. Since, I think, last June until today, until yesterday, I think she saw them yesterday for the first time, she wasn't allowed to have any communication with them. And I found 3 other cases. In 2 of the 3 cases, the woman alleged parental alienation. She dismissed it. She's like, no, it's not here. Forget it. We're not even talking about that. In the 3rd case, Deborah Flowers has been sentenced to jail 6 times as part of her divorce, including one time while she was getting treatment for breast cancer. So this judge is completely out of control. she's been cited by, it's called the Michigan Judicial Tenure Commission. She's going to go up in front of them in May. I don't know what's going to happen if I were deciding it. If it were me, I wouldn't let her serve me at McDonald's. So if it were me, she'd certainly lose her law license. But no, if it were me, I wouldn't let her serve me at McDonald's. I wouldn't trust her with that, let alone trusting her in any judicial manner. But it's not up to me. We'll see what happens. But, the thing she basically said, everything you guys are saying is accurate, but you have to look at the context. So, yes, I sentenced the 3 kids to juvenile hall because they refused to have lunch with their dad. And by the way, as far as those kids are concerned, just on a legal level, she had no right to sentence them to anything because they're not, the divorce is Omer versus Maya Simone. The 3 kids aren't a part of the divorce. She doesn't have, again, it's called jurisdiction. It's sort of like, dragging me into your divorce and saying, you need to babysit the kids. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to babysit the kids. Fine, you're going to jail. But she has no power over me and your divorce. She can't force me to do anything in your divorce. And it's the same thing with the kids. If the kids refuse to see the dad, there's nothing a judge can do. And then, the other thing is, you have a child. It's hard enough to, who are you to tell these kids to do anything? It's hard enough for the parent to get the kids to do what they want. Now you think because you're a judge, you can force them to have a healthy relationship with their father by judicial fiat. That's absurd. You're living in some perverted utopia if you think you can force kids to do what you say as a judge. And, so in May, this will all be played out, and she'll have to explain herself, and then it'll be ultimately up to the Supreme Court in Michigan what happens to her. As I said, I would not just revoke her license. I wouldn't, I'd move to the next station if I saw her as a cashier at McDonald's. But, she's not fit to serve on the bench. She's a menace.
Now, in the case, in my case, Judge Adams of Marin County Superior Court, like you said, she has made so many victims. There are secret Facebook groups and closed Facebook groups with like over 60 of her victims, and that's a really small little county in California. So I know that some of the moms in Marin County, and together with some really good lawyers like Barbara Kaufman, for example, and the Center for Judicial Excellence, have gone to the Judicial Oversight Committee in California to protest this. And this has also been on a CNN iReport, actually. It was covered on there. And but what they found out is that the people on the board of the Judicial Oversight Committee are basically friends with the judges. So nothing actually happens. What are these moms, and me included, what are we supposed to do about this if the Judicial Oversight Committees aren't going to do anything about these corrupt judges?
Right, and that's a great point. And in Judge Gorsuch's case, there was massive, overwhelming media attention. So that's an anomaly. Let me explain how these judicial oversight boards work. So you, a layman, or in your case, it's multiple laymen. So layman meaning a non-player in the court system. So you, a layman, bring a complaint about a judge, and the judge's colleagues look at the complaint. So other judges are going to decide if this judge is bad or good. Now, does that sound like that's a rigged system? Because that sounds pretty rigged to me. You know what I mean? I mean, this is like, let me get Sean Hannity, Ann Coulter, and Rush Limbaugh to do an objective analysis of the Obama presidency, or Rachel Maddow and a few of her friends to objectively look at George Bush's presidency. That sounds like it's pretty rigged. So it's the same thing. You got judges looking at other judges, and so and this happens everywhere. There was a recent article where it was like 1% of the cases brought wind up there's some sort of punishment, and they're basically all protecting each other. And it's even worse than that. When you appeal these judges, when you appeal these obscene rulings, the judges protect each other on appeals, and this goes all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. They rarely want to embarrass other judges. This is basically a boys' club. You're outside of it. You're not a court player. You're not a lawyer. You're not a court professional. You're not a judge. So you're making a complaint about a judge to another set of judges. You have very little chance. In Gorsuch's case, there was overwhelming media attention. They couldn't ignore it. but that rarely happens.
So what are we supposed to do then? Does federal court look at this stuff?
Well, again, yeah, in theory they look at this stuff, but not in practice. In practice, these are courts of appeals. They generally protect other judges. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to embarrass these other judges. So rather, let's just let the obscene violations of your due process, of your civil rights, of humanity, let's just let that go, because we don't want to embarrass. We want to protect other judges. And this goes all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Like there's I don't know if it's a famous case, but it's Stump versus Sparkman, where a woman, at the time she was 15, her mother, she was a little slow. She wasn't mentally retarded. She was just a little slow. And her mother thought she was running with a bad crowd. So her mother goes to a judge and asks the judge to have an operation so she can no longer have children without telling her daughter. And the judge, without the daughter present, just signs the order. The daughter is told that she's going to remove her gallbladder or some other type of, whatever the surgery was. It wasn't what it actually was. Daughter gets married a couple of years later, wants to have kids. They try to have kids. They don't have kids because she can't. Then they go to the doctor, and the doctor's like, well, you had this operation. She's like, what? And then when she finds out, she sues the judge, and the U.S. Supreme Court says, no, he's a judge. He has judicial immunity. And boom, and that is the U.S. Supreme Court. And here, this is such an obscene conflict of interest. And it was a 5-4 decision. So it's a 5-4 decision. So it's five judges told all judges, we've got your back. No one can. I mean, if you can take away a woman's ability to reproduce and not tell her without a hearing, it's called ex parte. If you can do that, you can pretty much do anything you want to do and get away with it. And this is what 5 U.S. Supreme Court judges have done. So they have other judges' backs. This goes all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. In theory, of course, you can appeal this federally. And, you violated my First Amendment, you violated my Fourth Amendment, you violated my 14th Amendment. But in practice, they're going to protect the other judges.
Yeah, so what are we supposed to do, Michael? Tell us.
Well, what I try to do is bring as I said, the difference between that case, the Simone case, and all other cases is the media attention. So what I try to do is bring media attention to the issue, and you hope that brings it forward. And look, I've done a lot of different interviews. Judicial corruption is not just a problem in family court. It's a problem in criminal court. It's a problem in guardianship. It's a problem in bankruptcy. It's a problem in foreclosure. It's a problem everywhere. So the issue of judges abusing their power isn't strictly to protect their mothers. And it's one of the most underreported issues, I think, certainly in the United States. I don't know how it is in the rest of the world. But, until the public wraps its arms around the magnitude of the problem and viscerally understands how serious it is, it's very hard to deal with, because, again, what you have is court players protecting other court players until the public reaches critical mass. And so, there's a show that I really liked on USA Network. It's called Monk. It was about the compulsive detective. It was played by Tony Shalhoub. And there was an episode where he said, I don't want to save the entire world. He was a brilliant detective in San Francisco. I just want to make things better in my little corner. And so, I don't have an answer to fix the world. I can only do my part. And I believe every time I tell these stories, every time I'm on this program, look, one of the things I've seen since I started reporting this, it's not quite 2 years, but since I started reporting on these issues, is I've seen BlogTalk radios and other types of radio programs like yours popping up. So I think, I don't want to call it's not a revolution, but I think a small movement is already happening by victims and other people who see these problems basically taking the ball in their own hands and saying, I'm going to do my part to report these issues. In a small way, you're mentioning all of these people by name. Now they're out there forever. They're embarrassed a little bit. And you're going to keep talking about it. Your ex is, unfortunately his name is Dave Hunter, so, he's not the only one. but his name is associated with what he's done forever, and that's a problem. I did a story in I think it was January or February of 2014 about firefighters in the U.S. Forest Service, and I named and they were all being sexually. It was like they tried to rape them, and it was all kinds of like sexual abuse by the males, and I named everyone by name. And the editors took a photo of a U.S. Forest Service firefighter and put it up on top of this story. And the guy called me, the guy whose photo it was, and who was innocent. He had nothing to do with it. He was a U.S. Forest Service fireman. And he's furious. He's like, you got to take it down. He's like, listen, I didn't rape anyone, and I'm not going to be associated with this story, and this is uncool. And so, he felt it. He understood the magnitude of being associated with this thing. He was innocent. So you name people by name, they're a lot less likely other people are a lot less likely to do it again. This story with Gorska is important because now people will think twice to maybe they don't want to be the next Gorska. So that's important. It gets out. And, from my perspective, the first thing you need to do is bring media attention. And at that point, you can start to fix some of these things. And basically, like I said, the last chapter of my book goes through all of the fixes, but you have to do everything you can to minimize the power of the courts. And that's basically what you have to do. But the first thing is people need to know that there's a problem.
And so why is it that the mainstream media is so hard to reach? Because I know the Women's Coalition has been gathering all the stories and has been reporting on this for many years together with Safe Kids International. And I know the Women's Coalition Facebook page gets like 58 or 85,000 views a week. So, it's clear that the public is very interested in these stories and they're very concerned about what's going on. So what's the reason that mainstream media is so hard to get inspired to talk about this?
All right, well, at the risk of shamelessly plugging my book again, that's a whole chapter in the book, but let me break this down. So there's really four main reasons why this goes on. So the first thing is they generally consider this he said, she said. Now, your story is not he said, she said. But if you take this to the regular reporter and you say, I'm involved in a divorce, and you're about to tell them the story, all they hear in their mind is, oh, my God, he said, she said divorce. I don't want to get involved. All right, so it doesn't matter how much evidence you have. Obviously not with me, but with the average reporter, it doesn't matter. If he said, she said, I don't care. Second of all, it's a private matter. This is what they consider it. Now, court corruption is not a private matter. Child molestation is not a private matter. Violation of due process isn't a private matter. But again, you remember Andre Agassi's perception is reality. Perception is reality. The third thing, and this is the most important reason, all of the other reasons wouldn't be as important without this one. There isn't a clear ideological hammer that the media can use. So look, whether the media is liberal, conservative, or even down the middle, the stories they generally do either they appeal to a left-right type of dynamics. So if it's a story about anything about illegal immigration, that's a great story for them. Now, if it's a liberal media, they'll do a story about the plight of poor migrants who are just trying to make it in America. If it's conservative media, it's the Kate Steinle story. Healthcare, all of it. The next time you look at the stories, look at them, you'll see a left versus right bent. So, family court abuse. Liberals don't have a policy on it. Conservatives don't have a policy on it. So, whether you're left, right, or middle, you don't care, because you don't think it advances any sort of a narrative that you're looking at. And the fourth thing is most victims of legal abuse, and there's actually a term that's coined, legal abuse syndrome, they have a form of PTSD, and people with PTSD are very difficult to deal with. And if you don't understand that they have PTSD, they're going to come off as crazy. So, I had abuse victims like inundate me with files on Monday, and then Wednesday tell me they're too They're too traumatized to speak. Now, can you imagine if you're the regular journalist and you don't understand PTSD, and someone sends you 30 files on Monday, and on Wednesday they say, I can't talk because I'm too traumatized? How are you going to feel about that person? Do you want to keep talking to them? So, and then, look, beyond that, there are other things. This is original reporting, this is investigative reporting, and this goes back to the beginning of original investigative reporting. You take on powerful forces, and in general, the media doesn't like that as much as a more simple story. And so even beyond these four things, there's another dynamic involved. And I quote from this book a lot, and it's my favorite living journalist, Cheryl Atkinson. She talks about how difficult it is to do investigative reporting. So basically, if you read that book, you take all of the elements of that book, and you add these four elements on top of it, and then you can appreciate how difficult it is to get these stories out.
I can actually add two more things to those 4 points that you just mentioned, because one of the things that's going on is that I have invited guests on this show, and they tell me, but the umbrella organization of your show is libertarian, and I'm not a libertarian, so I'm not going to speak on your show. It's like, well, but I'm not related or associated to any political party or thought or whatever. I'm actually apolitical. I'm not interested in politics. I don't believe in it. I think the system is totally rigged. But that's even besides the point. We need people to, and I'm speaking to all protective mothers out there. We're not in a position that we can pick and choose at this point. Let's just be happy that we have a voice. And what does it matter what the umbrella organization is? Just get your story out there. We just can't be picky like that. We need to use every opportunity to get our stories out there. So that's point number one. And point number two is that a lot of the protective mothers are gagged. They get gag orders. They get judicially retaliated against. Yeah, and this is also a real problem because, there's something called freedom of speech, and these mothers are gagged ordered, and it goes against their First Amendment rights. And this happens all the time. Moms, they say, I want to be on this database that you are creating of protective mothers on your website, but I can't go on it because I'm told that I can't talk about it. So my message to protective mothers out there is, look, if a judge tells you that if you talk about your case, you can't have that 30 minutes of supervised visitation with your child, you need to really think about what's going on. You rather have 30 minutes of supervised visitation with your child in which you can only talk about the weather, or would you actually like your kid back? If you want your kid back, you need to talk. You need to speak out. And you can't be taken to jail. You can sue the judge on the gag order because it goes against the First Amendment.
It doesn't just go against the First Amendment. I just looked this up on the internet. There's a landmark 2014 case. There's a father. It's the Bergen County Dispatch. The man's name was Surinder Melhan. His ex-wife walked into the judge's office, said a whole bunch of bad things about him, and said, I think he shouldn't see his kid. And the judge signed the order, and he didn't see his kid for a year and a half. And a Bergen County Dispatch reporter named Paul Nichols got wind that this happened and wanted to interview Surinder Melhan. So the judge said, well, no, I don't think that's in the best interest of the child, so you can't talk to the media. And the Bergen County Dispatch, they sued, and they won. And the federal judge said, no, that these gag orders, family court gag orders, violate the Constitution. Anyone who is gagged needs to know this case and immediately bring it up. And if you have the resources, if a judge still says gag order, you immediately take it to federal court. You basically look. In this article, it's from December of 2014. They have a link to the brief filed by their lawyer. All you have to do is change the appropriate people's names and use the exact same arguments. They've won it for you. This has already been argued in court. It's the Bergen County Dispatch. If you look it up, Paul Nichols was the reporter. the difference was it wasn't Surrender Malhan who did the suing. It was the newspaper who did the suing. And again, keep in mind, what was the judge hiding? Judge was hiding the fact that without a hearing, without the father knowing it, he took away custody for a year and a half. Or I think it was a she, but the judge took away custody for a year and a half. That's what they were hiding. That's what they didn't want revealed. And there's nothing in the best interest of the child. But they're not only illegal. You have case law, so you just need to look it up and argue it. And that's a very important case. But if people don't know the case, it's not very important. If there's a gag order issue, you cite this case. If they still issue the gag order, you take it to federal court. It's already been ruled unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm. So now what happens, let's say, because I get mothers protective mothers who contact me and they say, can you post about my case? And then I'm not talking about my case, but you're talking about my case, and that way it's still public. How does that work for mothers who are threatened with judicial retaliation? Because they can't be held responsible. Right? I mean, if I'm in the Netherlands,
let me
can't mess with me, so I can write about all these moms, right? I mean,
right? Yeah. Let me give you the theory and the reality. The theory is what you just said is right. Reality is they're going to hold the mother accountable. It's a woman named Ami Shalom who in Bergen County. So remember Bergen County Dispatch? She went on a talk show in Bergen County. And the judge said, I'm going to sue you unless you take the talk show down. And she had to beg the guy who actually owned the talk show to take it down. In the same county where this had already been decided. But so in reality, they'll always hold the mother responsible because they can't get to you. They can get to the mother, though. They can't get to you, though. So they'll always hold the mother responsible. But here's what I tell people. Someone who retaliates against you for going to the press, they were going to retaliate against, they were going to do the same thing, they just wouldn't have called it retaliation. The reason these gag orders are in place is to keep all of this quiet. Whatever they tell you, it doesn't matter. The reality is to keep all of this quiet. So I believe the only chance you have is to get enough media attention to embarrass people. They're not following the law. So forget the law. Forget all of the propers that you think are going to happen. They're not going to happen. So you're only, in my opinion, the chance you have is to create enough media attention to put enough pressure or hopefully to bring in a shark lawyer to help you to stop the dynamic. So, yeah, they're going to do this because the judge didn't want anyone to know. They took the father's parental rights away based on the mother's accusations in some back chambers in that case. They don't, in your case, they don't want them to know that they're ignoring all of this evidence of child molestation. In all of these cases, they don't want this stuff known, and that's why they gag them. And you're right, these gag orders are very, very common, but if everyone involved in family court knows this case by heart, and a gag order comes out, they start to cite it, these gag orders will slowly go away, and eventually they'll just stop entirely. And it's a landmark case, but only, right, it's only landmark if people know.
Right. Very good advice. So I hope all the protective moms out there shake off this fear that they have and just stand up for the rights to parent their own child. Don't let the trials and courts bully you into thinking that you can't do anything. The fear is the most debilitating, paralyzing type of dynamic. It's just a psychological type of warfare that they're trying to do onto you. And
right.
Don't buy it. Don't buy into that. Just go forward. You have the right to be a parent. You have the right to be with your children. Fight for it. And if we all massively fight, I was looking through some data this week and saw that there's an estimated 2 million protective mothers without their children right now in the United States alone. I mean, think about it. If all these 2 million women would come forward and start talking about their case on radio shows like this and on social media, and if all these mothers create websites and start linking to each other and start organizing that way, then you're right. You know, it embarrasses the people that are in power. It embarrasses the judicial system, and overhaul must take place. There's no other way. So I'm all for that. I'm all for Operation Expose, as you know. So let's take a little break. Let's take a little music break and play our theme song, and then we'll be back with another hour of me talking to Michael Volpe, investigative journalist and author. So we'll be right back. And welcome back to Hell is for Children, and I'd like to use this opportunity to thank Bobby Biesinger from World Integrity News Network for this platform. And I'm talking today to Michael Volpe, who's an investigative journalist and author, and who specializes in the topic of judicial bullying, and he's written many articles in the last several years on the topic of protective mothers and how we are bullied in court and the ways in which that goes down and what we can do about it. And we were talking about the importance of making your story public. There's a lot of moms that contact me and they say, "Oh, I'm afraid, I don't want to talk about it." And I keep telling them, you have to make a website. You have to get on social media, and it's also it feels really good to put it out there in a sense that you get support and you get people that contact you and, give you tips and advice, and it's just very important. So you're not alone. There are literally 2 million out there estimated. So connect and start bundling together, and together we are strong.
Right.
That's the only way we can do it.
Yeah, I
Go ahead.
agree with you. I wanted to, as you were saying, there's a movie from the 90s that I love called A Bug's Life. It was a Pixar thing. It was like the computer-generated images, and what it describes is like a whole world inside this person's backyard, and it centers on these group of grasshoppers who control the ants, even though there's far fewer grasshoppers than there are ants, and they control them the way you're describing, by fear. And so these two grasshoppers, after like a long day, they're in a bar, and the one of them sort of let these ants get away with some stuff, and the other one, I think it was played by but the voice by Kevin Spacey. He's discussing it with the other guy. I think it was Richard Kind who voiced the other grasshopper, and he's like, "Why'd you let him get away with it?" And he was like, "Well, who cares? It's not that big a deal." So he grabs a nut from like this little case, and he throws the nut at him, and he goes, "Does that hurt?" He goes, "No." Grabs another nut. He goes, "Does that hurt?" He goes, "No." He grabs the third one, "No." And then he opens the chute, and like 500 nuts come out. And he goes, "Does that hurt?" And he goes, "There's a lot more of them than there are of us. If they ever figure it out, we got nothing. We rule by fear." And that's how the courts act. And if you all realize there's a lot more of you than there are of them, they only rule by fear. If you see that scene, you'll appreciate what I'm talking about. All of these people rule by fear. If you tell them you're not afraid and you all join together, there's a lot more of you than there are of them.
That's right, and that's the only way we can really stand strong. So make a website, start putting your stuff out there, get on the database. I have a database on my website, and that website is www.freejasmijn.com, and that's FREEJASMIJN.com. So go on there and you'll see a tag there that is called Momicide, and that's a database I'm building with all the cases to show, because you can, you can share that link on your social media, and you can show people when they say, "Oh, well, that happened to you. How can that have happened to you? There must be something wrong with you." It's like, no. Here's the link to the database. There's already 250 moms on there, but there's an estimated 2 million of us, and I'd like to actually grow that database so there's actually 2 million moms showing on there, and that will wake up politicians. That will wake up folks who can make change. And one of the things you were when I asked you, like, what can we do if judicial oversight committees aren't even helping? I was talking about this with the Women's Coalition earlier this week, and a really good point was made during that conversation by the Women's Coalition. You know, the woman who runs that, Cindy Dumas, she said, really what needs to happen is that these cases are not decided by judges, but that there are jury trials put in place.
That's actually one of my ideas. The woman who edited my book, her name is Michelle McDonald. Well, full name is Michelle Lowney McDonald Shimoda, but she's been married a couple of times. She's all for it. But she's come up with an idea to get rid of family court, which if it can happen, I think you just get rid of family court. But I agree with Cindy, and I can talk to her next stage how often we agree. But I agree with Cindy. I don't trust judges to make any decisions except a matter of law. They shouldn't be making decisions on custody. They shouldn't be making decisions on financial stuff. They should just make decisions on whether or not a motion is proper, an objection is proper, what most judges do. That's what they should make decisions on. They can't be trusted for this. The other thing is all of these court professionals, they should all be outlawed. All they do is corrupt the system and unnecessarily complicate the system. These guardian ad litem, custody evaluator, psychological evaluator, there's an alphabet soup of names. They all basically mean the same thing. There's not a dime's worth of difference between a guardian ad litem and a custody evaluator. They all do the same thing. They should all be outlawed. That's I say if the system is complicated, make it streamlined. You have a litigant, you have a lawyer, you have a litigant, you have a lawyer, you have a judge. That's it. These court professionals, all they do is complicate the system. But Cindy's absolutely right. My idea was you give a certain amount of time, 18 months, 24 months. People, and they can do it state by state. Some states could be 6 months, some states could be 24 months. If the parties can't agree on custody, then it immediately goes to a jury. Because, look, most normal people would never allow a jury to decide custody. They'd make the agreement. And if you're dealing with a psychopath, I trust 12 strangers to figure out one of the parties is a psychopath over a judge.
Exactly. And I also want to add to that I really believe that child abuse cases need to be handled in criminal court. And I've said this in earlier shows as well.
That's a great point. Your ex was committing a crime that she... Right. I interviewed... Richard Ducati, who's a pretty famous, if you can ever get him on the show, that'd be a great interview, but he's a pretty famous lawyer in this stuff. And he was on the Sonny Kelly case, and he goes, what's ironic about her case is that if this were court in front of a special victims unit or in front of a criminal grand jury, they'd indict this guy in 2 minutes. And, I won't go into the details. The evidence that her ex-husband, Sonny Kelly's ex-husband, was molesting their child was so overwhelming. It was obscene how overwhelming it was. From physical evidence, she said his butt was shredded. To the guy met his kid in the doctor's office, and as soon as he walked into the room, he runs over to the kid and starts massaging his leg. He was compulsive about it. To the kid saying it, there was to doctors who examined him saying. I mean, it was again, the compelling part of Sonny Kelly's case was that it was so obscenely overwhelming that the kid was being molested. That's what was compelling. And that's what he said. The irony is that if it were put in front of a criminal proceeding, where, by the way, ironically enough, in a civil proceeding, it's the preponderance of the evidence. So theoretically, in your case, all you needed to do was prove by 50.1% that he was abusing your daughter, and then you'd be fine. In a criminal proceeding, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, which is sort of a nebulous standard, but much higher than 50.1%. And the irony is you put it into this much higher standard, and you get a much better outcome. And again, in both your cases, it's the specter of parental alienation. And ironically, again, one of the reasons why it would work in criminal court is you can't bring that up in criminal court. Can't bring up. They don't recognize parental alienation in criminal court, and so that's why it's much easier.
Yeah, and in family courts, like you said, they don't look at the evidence. And what kind of court doesn't look at evidence? I mean, come on, that's like a bogus circus as far as I'm concerned.
These courts, what they do is they look their evidence. in general. It wasn't so much in your case. In general, it's the court professionals. That's what it was in Senator Kelly's case. Forget that the kid's butt is shredded. Forget that the guy walks into a doctor's office in front of 3 doctors and starts rubbing the kid's legs. Let's forget that the kid's saying it. Forget that the kid's spitting blood. I can just go on and on. We have 12 court professionals that we appointed who are saying it's not happening. And so we're going to say it's not happening. And so these court proceedings, they're ruled by court professionals, which is why, again, you outlaw them. You streamline and you outlaw it. But you're absolutely right. What your ex did is a crime. Why are we settling this in a civil court? Child molestation is not legal. You're supposed to go to jail. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Put it into the proper jurisdiction and let that court deal with it. But what they do is they make it a part of these civil proceedings, and then they get into who's more credible, who's this, who's that. Let's forget about who's more credible. Is there compelling evidence of abuse? And if there is, it's got to go into criminal court. You're absolutely right.
And by the way, maternal deprivation is also a crime.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that's correct. And that's yeah. And they use that. These abusers use that. And look, the reason they need to cut off all contact is because, if the protective parent has any contact with the kid, their secrets are going to be exposed. But you're right. In a specious manner, they keep you away from your child, and it's upside down. I called it Kafkaesque. Bill O'Reilly refers to it as the Twilight Zone. The parent who's with long history of being a good parent is removed from the child's life. The parent accused of abuse gets sole custody. It's just if you didn't hear it 100, in my case, thousands of times, you wouldn't believe how crazy it was. But yeah, and it happens repeatedly. There was a survey done in 2008 by the Leadership Council. They believe 58,000 children per year are put with an abuser. And so when you get to 2 million protective mothers, that's, you multiply that by 5 to 10 years, and then you have the 2 million mothers. And that's almost the Leadership Council. I don't know if her title is president, but the top person there is Dr. Joy Silberg. And I asked her, what's the main reason for this? And she said it's the misuse of parental alienation syndrome. And you get this very dubious concept thrown in. And I want to make clear, I hate the term parental alienation. However, the behaviors associated with it are definitely real, in the sense that if you're supposed to see your child and the other party doesn't let you see your child on a consistent basis, that's called custodial interference. But what the parental alienation people do is they call it parental alienation, but it's really custodial interference.
Right, and custodial interference is criminally prosecutable. If you go and Google this, my ex right now should be criminally prosecuted under California Penal Code 278.5 for interfering with visitation, and that is a jail sentence, and it's a $10,000 fine. And so I have written to President Obama about my case, and I actually received a letter back from the State Department this week in which they talk about enforcing visitation. And well, you know what? I do think this guy is criminally prosecutable, so I leave it up to you guys to figure out the law. I don't think it's my place to tell you that, but really that's what should be happening here. One of the things that I want to grab back to is the secrets that you were talking about. Secrets, the abusive father doesn't want the secrets to be exposed, and that's why they break off all contact between the mother and the children. And this is another reason why to have a website. So when your child goes and Googles your name and they find the website and they see the whole story on there, then that whole brainwashing thing is out the door, because the child knows the truth. And when they actually read the story, they feel empowered to start talking about it. So please, protective mothers, go out there and put your story out there, not just for change and policy change and all that, but also to get in touch with your children. And if you go to my website, you'll actually see a tutorial that I put on there on how your child can get in touch with you without the father knowing about it. It's a tutorial that I made for the children. So start sharing that so these children also get empowered to not go along with this secrecy stuff. Another thing that I wanted to point out is, as you point out so well, that, court professionals and guardian ad litems and attorneys, they can all set their own outrageous fees, and that's why this is all really a financial scam. And one of the things that I thought about as a solution to this is if you are heading towards a divorce and you have children, we should have an insurance. We should have an insurance that you are obligated to take if you're in divorce proceedings with children, so that when you are proceeding towards the court about your case and about custody, now your insurance company is going to pay for the lawyers and the guardian ad litems and the evaluators, and there's no more financial incentives, because if you have financial incentives and you mix them in with human rights, that's a very big problem that's about to occur, and this is what we're dealing with. So financial incentives and human rights don't mix.
Interesting idea, though. I'd be curious to see how expensive that insurance would be, because the insurance companies would figure out how much money they'd have to spend. Well,
right. That would have to be regulated, right? I mean, you're insured when you break a leg,
they're not going to go
sick.
They're not going to go broke. They're not going to go broke giving you insurance. But if you involve the insurance companies, they got a lot of power. You watch them try to regulate it. You know what? Maybe they're going to be the ones with the hammer saying no more of these court professionals, so that they can just give you insurance for a service you're never going to use. That's an interesting idea. I've never thought of that. I need to think about it some more if I like it. But like I said, the idea I had is just to outlaw them. They serve no purpose. In my opinion, there's no one who's an expert on being a good parent. So these, guardian ad litem, custody evaluator, they're so bogus. They don't know who's a good parent. That's entirely subjective. Someone who's a disciplinarian thinks a disciplinarian's a good parent. Someone who's more kind and laid back thinks, disciplinarians are bad parents. Tiger moms are heroes to certain people, and they're abhorrent to other people. And who's right? I don't know who's right. And look, and it depends. In some cases, giving discipline works. In other cases, the kids rebel. So who is to decide who is a good parent? So it's all bogus. All of this stuff is bogus. These custody evaluations, psychological evaluations, they're all bogus. Guardian ad litem, they're all nonsense. They just need to be gotten rid of, and then you don't need the insurance because the divorce isn't that expensive.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, and the state doesn't have any business in the life of families. That's another really important point to make. I don't even think it's constitutional, and that goes that's a comment that's geared to the global courts as well. Who are these people coming in? They don't know me from nowhere. They don't know my kid, and they're now going to tell me whether I'm a good parent or not. What's that about? Right.
And by the way, if you look at most of these people's private lives, you'd just be absolutely shocked by some of the things that they're doing in their private lives. So here they are trying to tell you your business, and in the meantime, their own private lives are so they're just as messed up. But yeah, and like I said, this is all junk science. It's all voodoo. It's looking into your crystal ball. Who knows who is or isn't a good parent? If there's abuse, that's one thing. But this idea that because you accuse your ex with plenty of evidence of being a child molester, that makes you a bad parent. That's absolutely ridiculous. And it happens far too often. And the other solution, the other broad solution, I had specific solutions, but the broad solution is if you take away the financial incentives Most of the corruption happens with a financial incentive behind it. The whole idea of parental alienation. There's a lot of people making a big amount of money on it, and there's concepts on the other side against men. But you see, if you take away the financial incentive, you're gonna clean up the system, and the proliferation of these court professionals. There's a huge financial incentive. You're right, tens of thousands of dollars, $250 an hour, $400 an hour, sometimes more. To do what? To get divorced. Why are you paying for these things? There's no reason. You're getting a divorce. Can you imagine you and I have a business deal, and we're trying to break up the business deal, and some judge is like, whoa, before we end the contract, I think we should, have a psychological evaluation of both of you. I mean, can you imagine how ridiculous that would be? So,
but how,
marriage is a contract.
How do you see that when there are children involved then exactly?
Wait, hold on 1 second. You're breaking up. Say again?
So how do you see that when children get involved then?
How do I get who involved?
When there are children involved in the divorce, how do you see that proceeding then?
Well, the way I see it proceeding is either the two parties agree on a certain on a certain structure, or you have a jury trial. And I think most normal people would want to just figure it out on their own. And if you have somebody who's abnormal, as I said, but there is no magic bullet which will solve every problem. You'll have abuse no matter what your solution is, but I think having juries minimizes the amount of abuse. The juries will get it wrong. There will be juries who will get it wrong. There's no doubt about that. But but I think a lot less. There's a story that I covered in the book, Here in the Cloud, and she got pregnant with her boyfriend. And after her boyfriend attempted to rape her sister, her dad was retired CIA, so he had some resources and did background check, found out the guy's suspected of 2 murders. And the judge still gave him unsupervised visitation, and he killed their kid. And one of the comments was, like, they went through the case and said, can you imagine if this were put in front of a jury, how easy it would be to say the mother gets, and she makes 6 figures, is a professional, and everything is fine, and so, and they basically made the argument for me. They're like, can you imagine put in front of a jury how quickly the jury would be like, I think the mother should have it, and the dad should be nowhere near the kid. So, and the kid would still be alive. That's what I would do. I would have a certain period of time, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, and then at that point you go to a jury trial. And then if you want to bring in an expert, each side can bring in their own expert, and they'll be considered a hired gun, and the jury can, they can evaluate what the expert is saying based on that. But this idea that these experts are objective and unbiased is bogus. They're never objective and unbiased, and they just present the aura of it. It's the worst of both worlds. They're really working for one side. They're pretending they're unbiased, and so they present the veneer of being objective when they're not, and that's just the worst of both worlds.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm all for taking the financial incentives out, and even though all these experts, like I said, I think they should be paid out of an insurance because when a mom is working full time and taking care of children, the chance that they make less money than the father who's not taking care of the children full time and who can therefore make more money, right? Because they have more time, that makes the situation imbalanced to begin with. For all the years that my ex took me to court, and just for the record, I have never taken him to court, and he's been taking me to court for over 30 times, just to try to financially ruin me. And all these years, I thought, this is so unfair. He can work and work and work and make all this money, and here I am struggling as a single mom trying to make ends meet, and he's just financially devastating me. And this is what's happening to all the protective moms out there. So,
let me just point out that's exactly what Chris Mackey, and that's her father, exactly what his ex did. And she took him to court over 50 times. And again, he took her to court, I think, once or twice over a 6-year period. She took him to court over 50 times. And in her case, her dad was worth somewhere between $50 and $100 million, and that was the reason she did it, was to financially devastate him. That's a tactic which is used by the party with the financial resources against the party with more limited financial resources. Usually that's the man, but not always. But that's correct. That's standard in these legal abuse cases. That's standard. Just keep taking you to court for anything. At one point, Chris Mackey was taken to court because he didn't fax in a receipt along with his lease. You know, I mean, it was things that were just ridiculously obscene. Just keep dragging him into court. He doesn't have the money for a lawyer. The other side has plenty of money for lawyers, and there you go. And so, yeah, that's very common. And you're right. Insurance would have protected him if he had the insurance. But you know, his case, there's certain unique features. The other side was determined to do what ultimately happened, which was to kill himself. But there's unique features in his case. But you're right. That's very common with these well-off, certainly dads. Any party that's well-off, let me just drain you of funds. That's what happened in Susan Carrington's case, the case I described in Rockland County. That's what happened in Angela Hickman's case. Even in Sonny Kelly's case, eventually she ran out of money. Just keep taking them to court until they run out of money.
Right. There was also the case of Angela Gilmore. She had actually the court had appointed a guardian ad litem to her case. She hadn't asked for that, so this guardian ad litem then started charging outrageous amounts of hourly fees that she had to pay all of a sudden, and they sent her a notice of payment the day that she was supposed to be in court. So the mail couldn't send it within the 2-hour time span. So she got to court and they said, well, you haven't paid this bill. And she said, well, when did you send the bill? Well, today. And she said, well, I haven't received any bill and I never requested a guardian ad litem. But the court said, well, you didn't pay, so you're going to jail. And they threw her in jail over this. She had to go to jail, and they didn't give her diabetics medication. She's a diabetic. It was an outrageous situation, and it also made the newspapers. But this is the kind of legal abuse that's also inflicted not just by the abusive fathers, but by the courts. These courts really support the abusive fathers in this.
Correct. The courts support this abuse. Why are they allowing, Chris's, why are they allowing 50 court? It was like, so why are they allowing a court hearing every 5 weeks in his case? Why are they allowing 35 court hearings? Why are they
because
allowing
the judge makes
$5,000. Right. They make money. The lawyers make money. It's all a big game. It's all a big con. But there's a legal term that people should understand, which is called vexatious litigant. When someone just drags you into court repeatedly over and over and over again, you should look into seeing how you deem them a vexatious litigant. Vexatious litigant is basically someone who drags you into court needlessly. That's the layman's term for a vexatious litigant is someone who drags you into court on nonsense. That's the layman's term for it. And, it's different in every state. So, and I'm not a lawyer. So, if you're in a state, there may not be a statute on it, but you should certainly look it up. Just Google it and see what that's about. It's VEXATIOUS, vexatious litigant. That's what that person is. Maybe not legally. They're certainly morally and ethically a vexatious litigant, but that's one of the prongs of legal abuse is to drag you into court repeatedly. In family court, it's to remove you from your child's life, to remove you from your home. Ultimately, if they're trying to kill you, then they just start to jail you repeatedly, and then they take away your freedom, and then your will to live is taken away, and that's what happened with Chris. But yeah, that's a plank of legal abuse, is to drag you into court repeatedly until you run out of money. That's absolutely correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a pretty outrageous world that we live in, and one of the other things that I was thinking about, and one of the protective mothers contacted me a few weeks back and showed me this motion for due process violations. I don't know if you can maybe tell me a little bit about due process violations motions that you can file.
Right. Well, I need a due process is basically you're not given the same rights to go into court and to have the court hear your side of whatever is happening. That's in general. I'm not an attorney, so I want to be careful on this. I will say due process violations are probably the most common violations in family court. That's, in Surrender Melhan's case, the fact that his parental rights were taken away without a hearing, without him being there, that's a great example of a due process violation. In Chris Mackney's case, it was just repeatedly. But these things happen all the time. In Susan Carrington's case, the fact that a custody order and agreement was violated by this bogus restraining order, that's an example of a due process violation. That's in the 14th Amendment. The due process is enshrined in our Constitution, supposedly enshrined in our Constitution. But, that's something to look into. It's one of the most common violations in family court. It's the most common violation in family court, certainly at least what I've looked at.
Mm-hmm. Also, these ex parte motions, or not even motions, but ex parte hearings that take place. Like I've never been actually.
Always, what I was going to say, when there's something ex parte, that's almost always a violation of your due process. Look, here's the scenario for a proper ex parte violation. You and I are married, and I'm running around with an axe. All right, so you go ex parte, meaning without me being there, and saying you need to protect me because Mike has an axe. That is the only, that's not that specific, certainly that specific example, but an example which rises to that level is the only appropriate manner for an ex parte hearing. What an ex parte hearing is, you'll see the judge, and I don't even know you're there. So if I'm running around with an axe, it's perfectly reasonable for you to go to see the judge without me knowing it, so you can protect yourself. But if it's, I don't like my ex, or in Surrender Melhan's case, he's a bad father, he's a really bad guy, or in Stump versus Sparkman, my daughter's running around with the wrong crowd, that's not an appropriate reason for an ex parte hearing. That's a violation of your due process. That's correct. The two go hand in hand. These ex parte orders, these ex parte hearings, and your violation of due process, they go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that I wanted to point out is all these legal aid offices that are supposedly there to help us. We have to look at that as well, because I tried to get legal aid in Marin County, and when I call their number, I just get an automated voicemail. So, in other words, if you don't live in the county, then you have a problem because you can't get legal aid. So that is, in a sense, also due process violations at the core of the way the system works.
Correct. If you don't have equal access to the court as the other party, that's a due process violation. And again, in theory, not in practice, but in theory, whether you have $0 or $5 billion, you should have equal access to the courts. But of course, as we saw for the OJ trial, I don't think the defendant with multi-millions has the same access as a defendant with no money. But you're right, and these legal aid societies are supposed to that's supposed to be a way to improve that. Look, one of the ideas I had is what's called civil Gideon. Gideon was the case which decided that if you're ever charged criminal, you have to have an attorney. So I think in civil matters it should be the same thing. I don't think anyone who if you sue, and you don't have money and you want to sue, you can do that on your own. But if you're a defendant in any sort of a matter, you absolutely should have an attorney, no matter what. In cases of divorce, you're talking about your home, you're talking about your children. No, it's not your freedom, but your ability to see your kids, your ability to be in your home. your financial fortune. That's a pretty big deal. And people run out of money; they have to defend themselves. I don't see any difference between that and if you got drug charges and you're facing 3 to 5 years in prison. Why are you allowed to get a lawyer if you're facing 3 to 5 years in prison, but you're not allowed to get a lawyer if you're facing the rest of your life with your children, your home, all of your property, the wealth you've built up? I don't see how one is somehow more important than the other. So the idea I had was Civil Gideon, and people who have studied the issue, they've run test studies of this, and they found that actually Civil Gideon will save people money by reducing the number of frivolous lawsuits.
What is a Civil Gideon?
Civil Gideon, civil meaning you're given. That means that the government provides you a lawyer in civil matters if you can't afford a lawyer of your own. That's what it means. Gideon was the case which decided that in criminal matters, if you're charged with a crime, you get a lawyer, so that's why they call it Civil Gideon. But the simple way to understand it is if you're in a civil matter and you can't afford a lawyer, the government will grant you a lawyer.
Right, and that's the way it should be in our divorce cases. If anything, our children are the most important thing in the world. They are the future of the world. So why aren't, these cases need to be investigated thoroughly. We need to be represented thoroughly. And again, insurance could be one way to achieve that financial equality. But you're right. All these Facebook groups, all these protective mothers are figuring out the law. It's like they're sitting in law libraries days after day to try to figure out how to get their kids back. And I find that just tragic. It's just tragic to me,
Right. One thing I wanted to go back, you said some of the things that people can do. No, not so much for you because you don't live in I guess you can do it in your own country. But another thing that when people get together, court watching is an excellent way to make sure to provide a buffer against abuse. Court watching is another protective mother has some sort of a court date, whatever it is. They bring 2 or 3 friends who they've met who are other protective mothers or protective fathers, whatever it might be, other activists. I think Cindy Dumas does that a lot. Eileen King, I can't remember the organization she represents. She almost does it for a living, but she court watches all the time, and you go and watch. And so when the judge abuses, you're there to see it. That's another great way to keep an eye on all of these folks. But you're right. The moms, these litigants, they become lawyers without going to law school. And if I wanted to be a lawyer, I would have gone to law school.
Exactly.
But you have to learn the law, and it's ridiculous. But one of the problems is, unfortunately, the perception of most divorce lawyers is the reality, and they're all scum, and they're not really looking out for you. They're looking out for themselves. They're often in bed together. So often, even if you can afford a lawyer, you're actually better off representing yourself because the lawyers aren't really going to represent you well.
Well, and the other thing that I've noticed is you're making a really good point that they all know each other. These lawyers all know each other, and this is what when I was in Nevada County Court, it's very, very small little county, this backwards little town up in the Sierra foothills there, and my lawyer knew all the other lawyers, and he said to me, I can't really say these things that you would like me to say in court because next week I have to be in front of that same judge with another case, and if I get too aggressive to this judge, then I might lose the other case. It's like, excuse me, so I have to now shut up because your livelihood is on the line because you have to deal with you're in the same club with these folks every day, doing the same circus dance every day, and so we can't actually fight for our rights. What's going on here?
Right. That's a great point. There's a radio host named Fletcher Long. He was a longtime criminal defense attorney down in Tennessee, and what he calls it is they don't want to crap where they eat. And I want everyone to understand that what you just described violates basic legal canons. You are supposed to provide your client zealous representation. Now, the reason that in part the reason Fletcher Long is now a radio host is because he never crapped where he ate. He always provided zealous representation, and he really ticked off a lot of people. And the reason that upsets him so much is because he took seriously the idea that you provide zealous representation means you give 110% to every client all the time. Legally, you give 110%. That means you explore any legal option and you work hard to get every legal option. Like you said, and they're, I don't want to take, no, that's the exact opposite of zealous representation. They're sacrificing you for the long term. And I always wonder, like, if you sacrifice each client for the long term, at what point do your clients benefit from your legal representation? If you're not benefiting, if the next person isn't provided zealous representation, at what point do you get the benefit of the boys club? And then, and the other point I wanted to make about this, this burns me up. It happens everywhere. This is how lawyers operate. Then why even go to law school? What you really need to do is learn to be a great networker, and that's the way you become a good lawyer.
Yes,
these guys, they don't need to know the law. You just need to know how to network then. That's what you're saying. The law isn't real. This is all networking, boys club. And you're right. And look, it's not your county. Your county is 99.9% of the county. What you just described happens in almost every county, and not just small counties. It happens in Cook County, that's my county, where Chicago is at. It happens in Los Angeles County. Even in big counties it happens. Even in counties where you think it's really big, it's still a small world. What do you think, that divorce lawyers don't know each other in Los Angeles County? Of course they know each other in Los Angeles County. That's much bigger than where you were at. It doesn't matter. They all know each other. They all want to work together. They all want to get along. They don't want to get on the wrong end of a judge and another lawyer because they're protecting themselves for some client who they don't know. Sometime in the future, I don't know what they're protecting themselves for, because if they don't provide zealous representation, who exactly is benefiting? Nobody's provided zealous representation.
Right, and I've actually investigated Marin County Superior Court and the way this all goes down, and found some articles from the 80s and the 90s where an investigative reporter really got into what was going on, and this reporter found out that the judges and the attorneys actually go on golf retreats with each other, and during these golf retreats they actually decide the cases, and so they apparently get drunk and they get high together and they sit there and they just decide these cases there at the golf court. So it was all published. This is all public information. It's
right.
outrageous.
And again, I want to point out what that microcosm. That's 99.9% of the counties. It's again, it was exposed in that one place. But don't think that it was exposed in that one place. It's only happening in that one place. None of this stuff happens in a vacuum. That was another thing that Fletcher Long always talks about. This stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. This sort of boys club mentality, it doesn't happen here by accident. It doesn't happen in your county by accident. It happens because this is the way the legal profession operates. And by the way, I don't. It's not America, and it's not our generation. When William Shakespeare said, "First thing we need to do is kill all the lawyers," apparently he was right. And apparently, since at least the 1600s, when he was alive, down in Scotland, all over the world, the lawyers have operated in the same way. They've earned their reputation as scum. They've earned it. All right, this is what they do. Rather than they'll sacrifice you for the greater good of their own career. And again, that's why Fletcher Long gets so burnt up by it, because he actually practiced zealous representation, with a few exceptions. They'd rather throw you to the wolves and say, you're right, that's a really strong defense, but if I say that, the judge won't like me. That's just, that's, and it happens in journalism as well. Well, that's a great story, but, I'm trying to get access to the mayor, and the mayor's not going to like that, and I don't want to run that story. And, so at what point do you run the good stories? You know, like what you know, so access so that the mayor can give you their slop quotes is more important than running the good stories. And it's the same principle with these lawyers. You know, being nice to the judge, having the judge like me is more important than representing my clients. And like I said, at what point does the end game start to help your clients by the fact that the judge likes you if you're not going to make the proper arguments?
And it goes even further than that. I had an attorney after the deportation of Jasmijn. Her name is Jennifer Knops of Schoenberg Family Law. She's now no longer with Schoenberg Family Law. You got to wonder why. But Jennifer Knops was representing me, and she was giving me advice on how to deal with all of this. And she said, you know, you should just try and play nice with your ex and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I followed her advice, and then a couple months later she said, well, you've been playing nice with your ex, so now I can't prove that he's a bad father because you so she kind of set me up. She set me up,
right.
And I have all the emails to prove it, and this is all going to come out because I'm not done yet with that court, and they'll find out about that soon. But, yeah, these people, you know, and she charged me like $60,000 throughout all of this, leading me on, saying to me, yes, I care about your daughter, and I'm going to help you. And then basically she set me up for a fall, you know, and it's such betrayal to the child. How do these people live with themselves, Michael? How do they live with themselves?
They don't. People with no conscience and no empathy can live with themselves because they don't have a conscience and empathy. So that's, you know, I get asked that question all the time. You're not understanding the nature of evil. When you ask how they can live with themselves, how does a child molester live with themselves? You know, knowing what they've done to the child. Well, if you have no conscience and you have no empathy, then it's pretty easy to live with yourself because you don't care what happens to anyone but yourself. So that's how they live with themselves. That's how all of these, you know, you think because that person has a great career and a job that's not, you know, it's not easy to become a lawyer, you think that they can't be evil? Of course they can. It's easier to be evil than if you're a construction worker. It's almost like
they're all evil, though. They're all evil, though.
Well,
so we're up against the evil.
Well, as I said, you know, I'm not going to take credit for figuring that out. William Shakespeare is the one who figured that out. You know, first thing you need to do is kill all the lawyers. He wasn't saying it because they were great. He was saying it because the entire profession is scum. I mean, you know, what can I tell you? And again, I do it not just in family court. This happens in probate court. It happens in criminal court. You know, such a long story after story about criminal defense attorneys who would throw their clients to the wolves because they wanted to make nice with the DA so they can get better deals in the future. So, you know, convince some guy to take a deal that's terrible and sacrifice that person for their own greater good. Guardianship, it happens everywhere. They're all, you know, not all, but far too many of them, that's how they view the world, is this long-term game. And as I said, I don't know what the end game is. If you're always sacrificing your client for the long term, at what point does the long term come along?
It's so unethical, and the evil of it is so intense. And I wish I would have known all this when all of this started out for me, when I went into court thinking that the justice existed. Goodness, if I had known then what I know now, I would have done something else. Let's just put it that way. And you know, I find it's also difficult to leave the discussion at this because for all the protective mothers who are listening right now, they're probably sitting at home thinking, well, what am I supposed to do then? You know?
Well, it's not easy. It's certainly not easy. But you know, it's hard for me to answer that question because I don't know. It depends on what your specific case is. But you know, I'm a journalist, so I think media attention is the way to go. If you can get media attention, that they can put pressure on people. But yeah, no, your eyes should be wide open. If you think there's due process and constitutionality in family courts, you're in for a rude awakening. You absolutely are. You absolutely are. No, it's very difficult. Hopefully you have the resources for a good lawyer. And if you don't have the resources for a good lawyer, pray and hope. And,
well, once that lawyer Jennifer Knops dropped my case a week before it was supposed to go to trial, which I don't think is lawful anyway either, I started looking for pro bono lawyers. Lawyers with a heart, I call them, and I found out there's like a bunch of them, like a handful of them, and I started contacting them and saying, hey, this is the case, and are you willing to take on my case pro bono and et cetera, and they said, well, you know what? If I take on your case, then I'm going to be retaliated against by the Bar Association and by the good old the good old boys club. Network. Yeah, and so they were afraid.
It's very remarkable that people would say that. Fletcher has said he was a lawyer for I think 18 years. He told his wife after 10 years, he's like, I don't think I'll make it for another 10. That's right. Well, you can be retaliated. That's correct. You'll be retaliated against. But you also have to live with yourself. So what they're basically telling you is, I don't have enough courage to take on your case. And there's not enough people with courage in the world, and lawyers are among the world. And I agree. That's a corrosive dynamic. One of the ways to stop it is to expose it. So it's good that you got to name all of these names. The Bible, so to speak, for investigative journalism is All the President's Men, the Woodward and Bernstein book, and the series of articles which preceded it. And it's All the President's Men because they named them all. All of these people were exposed by name, and that basically started that revolution of journalists thinking like that if you do bad, you need to be named by name, called out by name. And so that's the first way to start it.
Right, and this is exactly what I did on my website. We're back to that. On my website, right. I actually post all the names, and I post all the evidence, and all the emails, and all the orders. Not all of it is on there, but the main part of it is on there. So when you read through it, you see exactly who the players are and how they play that mom, the protective mom, how they get you, how they slowly but surely take away more and more time from your kid until eventually you don't have any contact at all with your kid anymore. It's a game, and it's a pattern. It happens, like I said, on the website. It has this database now. If you go click through these names and you actually look at all the videos and all the websites that are related to these names, you'll see that the pattern is the same in all the cases. It's like a script that they use, So for all the protective moms who are just starting out, start looking at this. Really take a few days to go through this, and you'll start to see, okay, this is how they do this. And all these cases are the same. So then you're prepared. You know what's coming, and maybe you can figure out a way around it somehow. I know some moms actually buy their kids back from the dads, right? I don't know what you got to do to hold on to your kids.
For protective moms, the best advice I can give is learn as much as you can about parental alienation. It's a very dubious term, very nebulous term, and the more you learn about it, the more you're prepared. And because if you and this goes back, and this is in my book, this goes back to Albert Einstein, who used that term. I'm alienated from my kids. And number one, he was an abuser. There was recently a biographer who found two police reports where this guy was hitting his wife. Number two, what he called parental alienation. In fact, he shacked up with his cousin, and his ex-wife was like, bring your cousin/lover around with the children for obvious reasons. And the man's a genius. Apparently, literally a genius, the genius literally could not figure out what's the harm of my son and daughter. I think it was a son and daughter. He had 2 kids with her. What's the harm of having my cousin/lover around? And so the abusers have been using this term for over a century. And by the way, these fathers' rights groups, they put Einstein on a pedestal, like, he's the original alienated parent. No, he's the original abuser who used parental alienation, and it wasn't a term yet, but he actually used them. She's alienating me from my kids, and he beat her up. So this is what the language. It's not a coincidence that an abuser 100 years ago was using the same language that abusers 100 years later are still using. That's not a coincidence. That's the first thing. If you learn as much as you can about parental alienation, that'll help you. If you have the money for the right kind of a lawyer, that'll help you. And like, you expose the lawyers who tell you they're not going to fight hard for you. Who wants to hire a lawyer who's not going to fight hard for you? So if you expose them as someone who doesn't fight hard for you, and that's out there, that's going to hurt their business. And so maybe you're going to drive more people to fight hard for you. And by the way, if you're the one lawyer who fights hard for people, well, you can go back to your high school marketing class. It's called a niche. All right? Just like Steve Jobs, right before he died, figured out there was a niche for tablets. Well, there's a niche for lawyers who fight hard for their clients. In fact, there's a huge niche for it. So if you fill that niche, you're going to have lots and lots of clients. So it doesn't matter how much you're retaliated against, because people will be coming to you left and right, and you can make lots and lots of money. And you know what? You'll probably eventually have to get out of the business. But before you get out of the business, you'll have more clients and you know what to do with, and you'll make tons of money, and then you can go be a speaker, or like Fletcher Long, start a radio show and let the next lawyer take over for you.
Well, let's hope we just somehow can organize in such a way that we can bring all these cases to jury trial like we discussed. I think that would be the best way to go, so we don't need all these lawyers anymore and all these guardian ad litem and evaluators and mediators and whatnot. The entire circus needs to be unplugged as far as I'm concerned. So, but thank you for talking to me today, Michael, about all of this. I think it's very valuable information, and we have to continue to brainstorm towards solutions because and then actually act upon them. So I really appreciate your input in all of this because you've covered these stories for many years, and you've seen it inside out from all angles. So thank you so much for participating and for being my guest on the show today. And I'm sure we'll continue to talk, and maybe I'll see you on one of the future shows again. So, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, have me back anytime.
Okay. Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for listening to Hell is for Children. Bye bye. Thanks everyone for listening to Hell is for Children, and we'll see you on next week on Saturday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Thanks everybody, and have a great weekend.